I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Patricia Whitmore standing on my front porch with her oversized sunglasses, and that clipboard she carried everywhere like it was the Constitution itself. My name is Owen Kellerman, and I had just moved into the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision in Chapel Hill, North Carolina 3 months ago. The house was perfect, a nice 2-story colonial with a decent backyard, close to my job at the research facility. What I didn't realize was that moving here meant dealing with Patricia, the self-appointed queen of our HOA board and a woman who made it her life's mission to know everyone's business. "Owen," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I couldn't help but notice that generator you installed last week." I looked past her at my brand new Honda portable generator sitting on its concrete pad on the side of my house. I had spent $2,000 on that thing, plus another $500 getting a proper setup with a transfer switch installed. Hurricane season was ramping up, and after what happened to my parents' place in Wilmington during Hurricane Florence back in 2018, I wasn't taking any chances. "What about it?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Patricia pulled out a paper from her clipboard and thrust it toward me. According to HOA Bylaws Section 12.4, all exterior installations require prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. You didn't submit the proper forms. I took the paper and scanned it. Sure enough, buried in the dense legal jargon was something about exterior modifications. "Patricia, it's a generator, for emergencies. I wasn't aware I needed permission to keep my house running during a power outage." "Rules are rules," she said, her lips pursing into a thin line. "I'm going to have to ask you to remove it or face a daily fine of $100 until you comply with the proper procedures." "You're joking." "I never joke about community standards, Owen. Meadowbrook Hills has a reputation to maintain. We can't have unsightly equipment cluttering up people's yards." I felt my jaw tighten. "It's on the side of my house, barely visible from the street, and it's for safety. I'll give you 1 week to submit the proper paperwork. In the meantime, I'll need you to hand over the keys to the generator." That's when I actually laughed. "You want me to give you the keys to my generator? That doesn't even make sense." Patricia's eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. "If you're not authorized to have it there, then you shouldn't be able to operate it until the review board approves it. The keys will be held in escrow at my house." "That's not how any of this works," I said, feeling my blood pressure rising. "You have no legal right to confiscate my property." "It's not confiscation, it's temporary custody. Read Section 14.7. She tapped the paper still in my hand. I didn't need to read it to know she was stretching the interpretation beyond recognition. Patricia Whitmore had been the HOA president for 6 years, according to my neighbor, Mike Davidson, who had warned me about her during my first week. "She thinks she runs the whole neighborhood like her personal kingdom," he had said. I should have paid more attention. "I'm not giving you anything," I said firmly. "If you want to fine me, go ahead. I'll see you at the next board meeting." Her face flushed red. This is exactly the kind of attitude that brings down property values. I'll be documenting this interaction, Owen. Don't think you can just waltz into this community and ignore our established rules. She turned on her heel and marched back to her white Lexus SUV parked in my driveway, leaving me standing there with a bad feeling in my gut. The next morning, I woke up to go for my usual run before work and noticed something immediately wrong. The padlock I had put on the generator's control panel was missing. I walked closer and felt my stomach drop. The keys that I kept in the outdoor lockbox hidden behind my downspout were gone, and the lockbox itself had been pried open and left hanging. Patricia had actually stolen my generator keys. I pulled out my phone and immediately called the non-emergency police line. When Officer Chen arrived 30 minutes later, I explained the situation, showed him the damaged lockbox, and told him about Patricia's visit the day before. So this HOA president demanded you hand over keys to your own property, and when you refused, someone broke into your lockbox overnight and took them. Officer Chen wrote everything down in his notepad. Exactly. And I'm 99% sure it was her. Do you have any security cameras? I shook my head, frustrated with myself. Not yet. I was planning to install some next month. Officer Chen looked at the lockbox and the generator. The problem is, without video evidence or witnesses, this becomes he said she said situation. I can file a report for theft and vandalism, but building a case will be difficult. So she just gets away with it. I didn't say that. I'll go talk to her, get her side of the story. Sometimes people slip up when they're confronted by police. Give me her address. I provided Patricia's information, and Officer Chen headed over to her house 3 streets away. I called my office and told them I'd be late, then sat on my front steps trying to calm down. The whole situation was insane. I had moved here for peace and quiet, and now I was dealing with a petty tyrant who apparently thought she could steal people's property in the name of HOA enforcement. My phone rang an hour later. It was Officer Chen. I spoke with Miss Whitmore, he said. She denies taking anything from your property. Says she was home all night and has her husband as an alibi. Of course she does. However, I did notice she got pretty defensive when I mentioned the generator specifically. She went on a 5-minute rant about HOA rules and her authority as president. I documented everything. Keep the damaged lockbox as evidence, and if anything else happens, call us immediately. After Officer Chen left, I spent $200 on new locks and security cameras that I installed that same evening. I also ordered duplicate keys for the generator and kept them in my house. The whole thing cost me half a day of work and put me in a foul mood. At my job that week, I couldn't stop thinking about the situation. I worked as an environmental scientist at a research facility, and normally I could lose myself in data analysis and field work. But every time I sat down to focus, I'd remember Patricia's smug face and feel angry all over again. My coworker Janet noticed during lunch on Wednesday, "You've been distracted all week. What's going on?" I told her the whole story and she shook her head in disbelief. "You need to fight this. Document everything, get a lawyer if necessary. HOA boards can be ruthless if you let them push you around." "I just wanted a nice, quiet house," I said. "I didn't sign up for neighborhood politics." "Nobody does, but here you are. Don't let her win." That weekend, I spent Saturday afternoon reviewing every single page of the HOA bylaws and regulations. It was mind-numbing reading, but I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with. As I suspected, Patricia's interpretation of the rules was incredibly loose. The section about exterior modifications had an entire subsection about emergency equipment that specifically exempted generators, provided they met noise ordinances and weren't visible from the front of the property. Mine qualified on both counts. I drafted a formal letter citing the specific bylaw sections and delivered copies to every member of the HOA board. Patricia was president, but there were 4 other members: Robert Chang, the vice president, Susan Martinez, the secretary, David Foster, the treasurer, and Linda Thompson, a general member. I made sure to include photos of my generator setup, noise measurements I had taken, and a timeline of Patricia's harassment. That Sunday evening, I got a call from Robert Chang. "Owen, I got your letter," he said, sounding tired. "I want you to know that not everyone on the board agrees with Patricia's methods." "That's good to hear. The problem is, she's very aggressive about maintaining control. She's threatened to sue board members personally if they vote against her on certain issues. Most of us just go along to avoid the hassle. That doesn't sound legal. It probably isn't, but fighting it would cost time and money most of us don't want to spend. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. For what it's worth, your generator installation is completely compliant with our rules. I'll make sure that's stated at the next board meeting. When is that? 2 weeks from now. I'd recommend you attend and bring your documentation. I thanked him and hung up, feeling slightly better. At least I had one ally on the board. The next week, things escalated. I received a formal notice from the HOA stating that I was being fined $100 per day for an unauthorized exterior modification, starting from the date of installation. The total already came to over $2,000. The letter was signed by Patricia Whitmore and included instructions for payment. I immediately called Robert Chang again. "Did you know about this fine?" "What fine?" He sounded genuinely confused. I read him the letter. There was a long pause. "She didn't bring this to the board for a vote," he said. "She can't issue fines unilaterally. This is completely out of procedure." "So what do I do?" "Don't pay it. I'll call an emergency board meeting. This has gone too far." 3 days later, on a Tuesday evening, I sat in Patricia's living room with the other board members for what Robert had called an urgent special session. Patricia looked furious that the meeting had been called without her instigation, but she maintained her composure. "I don't understand why we're here," she said, sitting rigidly in an armchair. "Owen Kellerman has violated our community standards, and I took appropriate action." Robert held up my letter. "According to our bylaws, Owen's generator installation is completely compliant. He doesn't need special approval." "That's your interpretation," Patricia shot back. Susan Martinez, the secretary, spoke up. She was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who I had only met once before. "Patricia, I've reviewed the bylaws as well. Robert is correct. Emergency equipment under 1,500 pounds and meeting noise requirements doesn't need architectural review. It's right here in Section 12.4 subsection C. We need consistency," Patricia insisted. "If we let Owen do whatever he wants, everyone will think they can ignore the rules." David Foster, the treasurer, cleared his throat. He was a heavy-set man with gray hair and glasses. "The bigger issue is that you issued a fine without board approval. That's a violation of our own governance procedures. We need a majority vote for any fine over $50. Patricia's face was turning red. "I am the president of this board. I have the authority to make executive decisions in the interest of the community." "No, you don't," Linda Thompson said quietly. She was younger than the others, maybe in her late 30s, and I hadn't heard her speak before. "I've been on this board for 2 years, and I'm tired of watching you abuse your position. You bully people, you twist the rules to fit your personal preferences, and you act like you own this neighborhood." "How dare you?" Patricia hissed. "I dare because someone needs to say it," Linda continued, her voice getting stronger. 3 families have moved out of Meadowbrook Hills in the past year specifically because of you. I know because they told me. We're getting a reputation as a nightmare HOA, and property values are going to suffer because of it." The room fell silent. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode, but she was clearly trying to maintain control. Robert took charge. "I'm calling for a vote to rescind the fine against Owen Kellerman. All in favor?" 4 hands went up, everyone except Patricia. "The fine is rescinded," Robert said. "Owen, you'll receive a formal letter confirming this. Patricia, I'm also calling for a vote to issue you a formal censure for violating board procedures." "You can't do this," Patricia said, standing up. "We can and we are. All in favor?" 4 hands again. "This board is a joke," Patricia said, grabbing her clipboard. I've spent years building this community, maintaining our standards, keeping our property values high. And this is the thanks I get. Fine. See how well you all do without me." She stormed out of her own living room, leaving the five of us sitting there awkwardly. "Well," David said after a moment, "that went about as well as expected. We wrapped up the meeting quickly after that. As I was leaving, Robert pulled me aside. 'Watch yourself,' he said quietly. 'Patricia doesn't take losing well. I wouldn't put anything past her at this point.' His warning proved prophetic. Over the next week, I noticed Patricia driving past my house multiple times a day. She'd slow down, stare at my generator setup, then drive on. It was creepy and obvious. My new security cameras caught her 3 times stopping her car in front of my house and taking photos with her phone. Then Hurricane Douglas entered the forecast. It was early September, and the storm had formed off the coast of Africa and rapidly intensified as it crossed the Atlantic. By the time it reached the Caribbean, it was a Category 4 with sustained winds of 140 miles per hour. The projected track had it making landfall somewhere between Charleston and the Outer Banks. Chapel Hill wasn't on the coast, but we were close enough that a major hurricane meant serious winds, heavy rain, and almost certainly power outages. The entire region went into preparation mode. Grocery stores ran out of water and batteries. Gas stations had lines around the block, and hardware stores couldn't keep plywood in stock. I checked my generator, made sure I had plenty of fuel stored in approved containers in my garage, and stocked up on food and supplies. I also charged every battery I owned and filled my bathtubs with water. 2 days before the expected landfall, the track shifted slightly north. Hurricane Douglas was now projected to come ashore near Wilmington as a strong Category 3, which put Chapel Hill directly in the path of the worst winds and rain. The governor declared a state of emergency. Schools closed. Businesses shuttered. Everyone hunkered down. Patricia, of course, sent out a community-wide email reminding everyone about HOA rules regarding storm preparation. Please ensure that all patio furniture is properly stored and that trash cans are secured. We must maintain our community standards even during emergencies. I deleted the email without finishing it. Hurricane Douglas made landfall at 2 in the morning on a Thursday. I woke to the sound of wind howling like a freight train and rain hammering against my windows. The power flickered 3 times in the first hour, then went out completely around 4 in the morning. I got up, threw on clothes, and headed to my garage. My generator was ready to go. I opened the side door and started to move toward it when my flashlight caught something that made my blood run cold. The fuel cap was off, and someone had poured sand into my generator's fuel tank. I stood there in shock, rain blowing in through the open garage door, staring at the sabotage. My generator was completely useless. The sand would have destroyed the engine if I had tried to start it. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security camera footage. The timestamp showed 11:30 the previous night. A figure in a dark rain jacket and hood had climbed over my back fence, made their way to the generator, and spent 5 minutes doing the damage. The angle didn't show their face, but I could see they were using my stolen keys to open the generator's access panels. The figure was slim, about 5'6", and moved with quick, nervous energy. Patricia Whitmore was 5'6". I tried calling the police, but the lines were jammed with emergency calls. The hurricane was causing chaos across the region, and sabotaged generators weren't exactly a priority. I sent the video footage via email to Officer Chen with a detailed explanation, then focused on my immediate problem. My house was going to be without power for what could be days, and I had no backup plan because I had trusted that my $2,000 generator would work. By dawn, the hurricane was directly overhead. The wind was terrifying, shaking my whole house and tearing branches off trees. I could hear crashes and bangs from all around the neighborhood. I stayed away from windows and monitored the news on my phone, trying to conserve battery. The eye of the storm passed around 9 in the morning, giving us a brief respite. I looked outside and saw devastation. Trees down everywhere, shingles torn off roofs, someone's trampoline wrapped around a telephone pole. The streets were flooded with about 2 feet of standing water. And then I saw Patricia. She was standing on her front porch 3 streets over, visible from my second-floor window. Even from a distance, I could see she was on her phone, gesturing frantically. Her house looked dark. No lights, no generator running. The irony hit me like a truck. She had sabotaged my generator, but she didn't have her own backup power. She was stuck in the same situation as me, except she had done it to herself through sheer spite. The eye passed, and the backside of the hurricane hit with renewed fury. The wind shifted direction, and the rain came down even harder. I spent the day reading books, eating non-perishable food, and trying not to think about my destroyed generator. By evening, the storm had moved inland and weakened. The wind was still strong, but the worst was over. The power, however, remained out. According to the news, over 500,000 people across the region had no electricity, and the power company was saying it could be 5 to 7 days before everything was restored. 5 to 7 days without power in September in North Carolina meant heat, humidity, spoiled food, and serious discomfort. That night, using a flashlight, I examined my generator more closely. The sand had contaminated everything. The fuel tank, the carburetor, the fuel lines. It would need to be completely disassembled, cleaned, and rebuilt. Even if I could find a repair shop that was open, it would take days and cost hundreds of dollars. I was furious. Patricia had committed a serious crime, destroying my property out of petty revenge, and now we were both suffering the consequences. The next morning, Friday, I woke to oppressive heat and humidity. My house felt like a sauna. I opened windows to get airflow, but it didn't help much. I ate a breakfast of granola bars and warm water, then decided to walk around the neighborhood to assess the damage. The destruction was worse than I had thought. Huge oak trees had been uprooted, their massive root balls sticking up like walls. Power lines were down everywhere, tangled in debris. Several houses had significant damage, missing sections of roof or blown-out windows. The community pool had been filled with debris and was now a murky brown soup. As I walked past Patricia's house, I saw her in her front yard, still in pajamas, looking disheveled and exhausted. Her yard was a mess, with branches and shingles scattered everywhere. Her white Lexus had a tree branch across the hood, leaving a visible dent. She saw me and her expression transformed from exhausted to hostile in an instant. "This is your fault," she said, walking toward her property line. I stopped, genuinely confused. "Excuse me. If you had followed the rules, none of this would have happened. The board wouldn't have turned against me and I wouldn't be stuck in this situation." "Patricia, you sabotaged my generator. I have video footage." Her face went pale, then flushed red. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You climbed my fence at 11:30 on Wednesday night and poured sand into my fuel tank. You used the keys you stole from my lockbox. That's ridiculous. I was home during the storm like everyone else." "The footage shows someone matching your exact height and build, and they had keys to my generator. Keys that went missing after you demanded I hand them over." Patricia crossed her arms. "You can't prove anything. That video could show anyone." The police will be very interested in it once they have time to investigate. Destruction of property, especially during a declared state of emergency, is a serious crime. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts. You committed a crime and there will be consequences. Patricia's composure cracked. Do you have any idea what it's like in my house right now? No power, no air conditioning, the food in my refrigerator is all spoiled. My husband has a medical condition that requires his medication be kept cool. I had to throw away $300 worth of insulin this morning. I felt a flash of sympathy, then remembered she had deliberately created this exact situation for both of us. You should have thought about that before destroying my generator. I didn't destroy anything. She was yelling now, her voice shrill. And even if someone did, maybe you deserved it for being so arrogant and thinking you're above the community rules. Several neighbors had come out of their houses, drawn by the shouting. I saw Mike Davidson, my neighbor who had warned me about Patricia, standing on his porch watching. Others were gathering at a distance. The only person who put themselves above the rules was you, I said, keeping my voice calm. You stole my property, issued illegal fines, and then committed vandalism. I feel sorry for your husband, but his medical situation is on you, not me. Patricia looked like she was about to say something else, but instead she turned and stormed back into her house, slamming the door. Mike walked over to me. I heard most of that. Is it true? She sabotaged your generator. I have video footage. He whistled low. She's finally gone too far. Half the neighborhood has been waiting for something like this. She's made life miserable for a lot of people. Over the next few hours, word spread about the confrontation. People kept stopping by my house to ask about what happened. It turned out Patricia had a long history of harassment that I had only seen the tip of. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman from 2 streets over, told me Patricia had threatened to fine her $1,000 because her grandchildren had drawn on her driveway with chalk. The Marshalls, a young couple with twin toddlers, said Patricia had called Child Protective Services on them because their kids were playing in the front yard, unsupervised, despite the parents being right there. Tom Brennan, who lived at the end of my street, told me Patricia had tried to force him to cut down a 100-year-old oak tree because it blocked her view of the sunset. The stories went on and on. Patricia Whitmore had been terrorizing Meadowbrook Hills for years, and everyone was too afraid or too tired to fight back. By Saturday, the second full day without power, tensions were running high across the neighborhood. The heat was brutal, reaching 95 degrees with 90% humidity. People were sitting on their porches, trying to stay cool. Some had small camping generators running fans or charging phones. The sound of chainsaws filled the air as people cleared down trees. I spent the day manually cleaning my generator as best I could, though I knew it needed professional service. It was frustrating, delicate work, and the heat made everything worse. My clothes were soaked with sweat, and I had to take frequent breaks to drink water. That evening, Robert Chang stopped by. I heard about your generator. Patricia really did that. I showed him the video footage on my phone. He watched it twice, shaking his head. This is criminal, he said. I knew she had control issues, but this is beyond anything I imagined. How's your power situation? I asked. I have a small generator, enough to run my refrigerator and a few fans. My wife and I are managing. What about you? Roughing it. Food's mostly spoiled, but I stocked up on non-perishables. It's just uncomfortable. Robert was quiet for a moment. I'm calling for Patricia to be removed from the board. Actually, I'm going to recommend we vote to remove her as a homeowner from the community entirely if that's legally possible. This kind of behavior can't be tolerated. I just want her prosecuted for what she did. she will be. I'll make sure of it, but the board also needs to take action. We've enabled her for too long. Sunday morning, day 3 without power, I woke to find Patricia's husband, Gerald, standing on my porch. He was a thin, pale man in his 60s who I had only seen a few times in passing. "Can I help you?" I asked, opening the door. Gerald looked uncomfortable. "I need to talk to you about Patricia." I invited him in, though the house was stifling. We sat in my living room with the windows open, a slight breeze providing minimal relief. "I want to apologize for my wife," Gerald said. "What she did to your generator was wrong, completely wrong." "Did she admit it to you?" He nodded. "Last night. She was in tears, saying everything was falling apart and it was all your fault. I pressed her and she finally told me what she did." I was horrified. "Your medication situation," I said. "How are you managing?" We drove to Charlotte yesterday to my brother's house. He has power. I refilled my prescription and stored it there. I'll go back every few days if needed until our power is restored. I'm glad you found a solution." Gerald leaned forward. "Patricia has always been intense about rules and order. It's part of her personality, part of what makes her successful in her real estate career. But in the last few years, since she became HOA president, it's become an obsession. She can't let anything go. Every little violation is a personal affront. I've tried to talk to her about it, but she won't listen." "That doesn't excuse what she did." "No, it doesn't. I just wanted you to know that I don't support her actions, and I'll cooperate fully with any legal proceedings. She needs to face consequences, and maybe that will finally make her realize she's gone too far." After Gerald left, I felt slightly better about the situation. At least Patricia's husband was reasonable, even if she wasn't. The power finally came back on late Monday afternoon, 4 full days after Hurricane Douglas had knocked it out. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Air conditioning, cold water, lights, the ability to charge devices properly. I stood in front of my AC vent for a solid 5 minutes, letting the cold air wash over me. My first priority was salvaging what I could from my refrigerator, though most of it had to be thrown out. Then I took the longest, coldest shower of my life. After that, I sat down and composed a detailed email to Officer Chen, including all the video footage, witness statements from neighbors, and documentation of Patricia's previous harassment. Officer Chen called me the next morning. "I've reviewed everything you sent. This is enough for us to move forward with charges. Destruction of property, theft, and given the state of emergency context, there may be additional charges. Can you come down to the station to give a formal statement?" I went that afternoon and spent 2 hours going through everything with Officer Chen and a detective named Rodriguez. They were thorough, asking detailed questions and making sure they had all the evidence properly documented. "We'll be bringing Miss Whitmore in for questioning," Detective Rodriguez said. "Given your video footage and her husband's willingness to cooperate, I expect this case will move forward pretty quickly." "What kind of penalties are we looking at?" Destruction of property over $1,000 is a felony in North Carolina. Combined with the theft and the fact that it happened during a declared emergency, she could be looking at significant jail time if convicted. At minimum, she'll face restitution requirements and probation. 2 days later, on Wednesday morning, I watched from my window as a police cruiser pulled up to Patricia's house. Officer Chen and another officer went to the door. Patricia answered, and even from a distance, I could see her body language shift from confident to defensive to frightened. They talked for several minutes, then Patricia stepped back inside, presumably to get her things. She emerged a few minutes later and was escorted to the police car. She wasn't handcuffed, but it was clear she was being taken in for questioning. The whole neighborhood watched. People came out onto their porches and stood in their yards, witnessing the fall of their tyrannical HOA president. The local news picked up the story 2 days later. HOA president arrested for sabotaging neighbor's hurricane generator was the headline. The story detailed Patricia's actions, the video evidence, and the fact that she had sabotaged essential emergency equipment during a major hurricane. The reporter interviewed several Meadowbrook Hills residents who shared their own stories of Patricia's harassment. The story went viral online. Within days, it was being shared on social media and picked up by national news outlets. Patricia Whitmore became the face of HOA tyranny, a cautionary tale about petty power and destructive spite. The legal process moved forward. Patricia was formally charged with felony destruction of property, theft, and a special enhancement charge related to tampering with emergency equipment during a declared disaster. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor's office, facing public pressure and the clear evidence, wasn't inclined to be lenient. The HOA board, meanwhile, held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. Robert Chang took over as acting president, and they immediately began the process of reviewing and reforming the community's governance procedures. "We're implementing new oversight rules," Robert told me at a neighborhood gathering a week after Patricia's arrest. "No single board member can issue fines or make major decisions without a vote. We're also establishing a grievance process for homeowners who feel they've been unfairly targeted. And we're going to revise the bylaws to be more reasonable and less open to interpretation." "Sounds like good changes," I said. "They're long overdue." Patricia's actions were extreme, but they highlighted problems that have been building for years. This is our chance to fix them. My generator was professionally cleaned and repaired, costing $800. I documented every penny for the restitution claim. I also installed additional security measures, including better cameras and reinforced locks, though I doubted anyone would try something like this again. The preliminary hearing was held in October. I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom as Patricia stood before the judge. She looked diminished, her usual confidence replaced with visible anxiety. Her lawyer argued for reduced charges, claiming it was a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by stress. The prosecutor presented the video evidence, my testimony, Gerald's statement, and testimonies from other neighbors about Patricia's pattern of harassment. The judge was not impressed with the defense's arguments. "Miss Whitmore," the judge said, looking over his glasses at her, "you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that position repeatedly. Your actions endangered not just Mr. Kellerman, but potentially yourself and your husband by depriving your neighbor of emergency equipment during a major hurricane. This shows a profound lack of judgment and a disregard for both community welfare and the law." Patricia's trial was scheduled for January. In the meantime, she was released on bond with conditions that included staying away from me and other witnesses, and she was prohibited from participating in any HOA activities. The holidays came and went. Meadowbrook Hills felt different now, lighter somehow. The new HOA board implemented their reforms, and people seemed more relaxed, more willing to be part of the community, rather than just residents living in fear of violations and fines. I spent Thanksgiving with my parents in Wilmington, where they were still rebuilding from their own hurricane damage years earlier. I told them the whole story, and my dad just shook his head. "Some people just can't handle even a little bit of power," he said. "It goes straight to their heads." Christmas was quiet but nice. Several neighbors invited me to their gatherings, and I was surprised by how friendly everyone was once the shadow of Patricia's tyranny had been lifted. We exchanged stories, laughed about the absurdity of HOA drama, and made plans for community improvements that actually made sense. The trial began on a cold Tuesday in mid-January. The courtroom was packed with people from Meadowbrook Hills and reporters covering the story. I testified on the first day, walking the jury through everything that had happened. Patricia's initial confrontation, the stolen keys, the video footage of the sabotage, the aftermath during the hurricane. Patricia's lawyer tried to discredit me, suggesting I might have fabricated the video or that the damage could have been accidental. But the evidence was too clear, and the prosecutor did an excellent job of showing the timeline and Patricia's motive. Gerald testified the next day. He looked miserable as he described his wife's obsession with HOA enforcement, her increasing irrationality, and her eventual confession. It was clear he still loved her, but couldn't support her actions. Other neighbors testified about Patricia's harassment over the years, establishing a pattern of abusive behavior. Mrs. Henderson broke down crying as she described being threatened with fines over sidewalk chalk. The marshals talked about the trauma of having CPS called on them for no reason. The defense tried to paint Patricia as a dedicated community leader who had made one mistake under stress. But the sheer volume of evidence and testimony made it clear. This was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of years of abuse. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Patricia guilty on all counts: felony destruction of property, theft, and the enhanced charge related to emergency tampering. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. I attended, along with many other neighbors. The judge heard statements from both sides, then delivered his ruling. Miss Whitmore, you have been found guilty of serious crimes that put your neighbor and potentially others at risk during a natural disaster. While I acknowledge your lack of prior criminal history, the calculated nature of your actions and the extensive pattern of abusive behavior cannot be overlooked. I hereby sentence you to 18 months in prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to Mr. Kellerman for all damages, including repairs to the generator, replacement of spoiled food, and the cost of security upgrades. The total restitution amount is $8,300. Patricia's face crumpled, and she began crying. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder as the judge continued. Additionally, I am issuing a permanent restraining order prohibiting you from contacting Mr. Kellerman or coming within 500 feet of his property. Upon your release, you are prohibited from holding any position of authority in any homeowner association for a period of 10 years. This court hopes that you will use your time in custody to reflect on your actions and the harm you have caused. The gavel came down, and Patricia was led away by bailiffs. Gerald sat in the front row, his head in his hands. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that justice had been served, sadness that it had come to this, and a lingering anger at everything that had happened. But mostly, I felt like a weight had been lifted. Outside the courthouse, reporters tried to interview me, but I politely declined. Robert Chang gave a statement on behalf of the HOA board, emphasizing that Patricia's actions did not represent the community and that significant reforms had been implemented. Life slowly returned to normal after that. The new HOA board continued making positive changes, and Meadowbrook Hills started to feel like an actual community rather than a police state. Property values, which had been stagnant during Patricia's reign, began increasing again as word spread about the reforms. I finally felt comfortable in my home. I added a few more upgrades to my generator setup, including a proper security enclosure, and made sure everything was documented and approved by the board, though the process was now simple and reasonable. Spring came, bringing warm weather and new growth. My yard filled with flowers, and I spent weekends doing projects and maintenance. Neighbors would stop by to chat, and I got invited to barbecues and pool parties at the community center. One Saturday in April, I was working in my garage when Mike Davidson stopped by with a six-pack of beer. We sat on my porch, drinking and watching kids play in the street. "You know," Mike said, "I never thought I'd say this, but that whole situation with Patricia might have been the best thing that ever happened to this neighborhood." "That's a weird way to look at it," I said. "Think about it. She was making everyone miserable for years, and nobody had the guts to stand up to her. You forced the issue, and now we have a functional HOA that actually serves the community. Property values are up, people are happy, and we're not all walking on eggshells anymore. I just wanted my generator to work during the hurricane." Mike laughed. "And look where it led. Sometimes the smallest things create the biggest changes." We clinked our bottles together and watched the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. The neighborhood was peaceful, the air was warm, and for the first time since moving to Meadowbrook Hills, I felt completely at home. Gerald Whitmore eventually divorced Patricia. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that he had tried to maintain the marriage, but the strain of everything had been too much. He moved to Charlotte to be closer to his brother, selling their house in Meadowbrook Hills quietly and without drama. Patricia served her full sentence, getting out after 14 months for good behavior. I never saw her again. According to public records, she moved to Virginia after her release, presumably to start fresh somewhere no one knew her story. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, but I honestly didn't spend much time thinking about her. The generator that had caused so much trouble continued to sit on the side of my house, properly maintained and ready for the next emergency. Hurricane season came and went that year without any major storms threatening North Carolina, which was fine by me. I had had enough drama for a lifetime. The HOA board continued to thrive under new leadership. Robert Chang served as president for 2 years before stepping down, handing the position to Susan Martinez, who brought fresh energy and ideas to the role. They implemented a community garden, organized regular social events, and generally made Meadowbrook Hills the kind of place people wanted to live rather than endure. I ended up serving on the Architectural Review Committee for a year, helping to streamline the approval process and making it more homeowner-friendly. It was satisfying to be part of positive change, to help prevent future situations like mine from happening. My parents visited in the summer and my dad walked around the neighborhood with approval. "Nice place," he said. "Looks like you picked a good spot to settle down." "It is now," I said, thinking about everything that had happened to get here. The story of Patricia and the generator became something of a legend in Chapel Hill. People would recognize me at the grocery store or the hardware store and ask if I was that guy with the HOA generator situation. It was weird being locally famous for something like that, but most people were supportive and shared their own HOA horror stories. I gave a talk at a community law center about HOA abuse and homeowner rights. About 50 people showed up, and the stories they shared were eye-opening. Patricia Whitmore wasn't unique, it turned out. There were petty tyrants in HOAs across the country, making people's lives miserable over minor infractions and personal vendettas. "The key is documentation," I told the audience. "Keep records of everything. Install security cameras if you need to. And don't be afraid to push back when the HOA overreaches its authority. Most of these boards rely on people being too intimidated or too tired to fight back." One woman in the audience raised her hand. But what if fighting back costs more than just paying the fine or doing what they want? Sometimes it does, I admitted. You have to pick your battles, but if everyone just rolls over, nothing ever changes. Patricia got away with her behavior for years because people were afraid. It took one person standing up to bring the whole thing down. By the time a year had passed since the hurricane, life in Meadowbrook Hills had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The neighborhood had healed, both from the physical damage of the storm and the emotional damage of Patricia's reign. New families moved in, and the community welcomed them with genuine warmth rather than threatening letters about bylaw violations. I replaced my original Honda generator with a newer model that had better security features and was even quieter. The Architectural Review Committee approved it in about 15 minutes with a simple online form. It was a stark contrast to the nightmare that had started this whole saga. One evening in September, almost exactly a year after Hurricane Douglas, I was sitting on my porch when I saw the new family that had moved into Patricia's old house. They were a young couple with a baby, and they were struggling to carry groceries while the baby cried. I walked over and introduced myself. "Need a hand?" The husband looked relieved. "That would be great, thanks. I'm Marcus and this is my wife Jennifer. Owen, welcome to the neighborhood." As I helped carry their bags inside, Jennifer asked, "Is this a good place to live?" "We heard some stories about HOA problems." I smiled. "It used to have issues, but those are resolved now. You picked a good time to move in. The community is solid and the HOA board actually functions like it's supposed to." "That's good to hear," Marcus said. We were nervous after reading some online reviews. Those were probably from a few years ago. Things have changed a lot since then. We chatted for a few more minutes, and I invited them to the next neighborhood barbecue. They seemed like nice people, and I was glad they were part of the community. Walking back to my house, I thought about how far things had come. A year ago, I had been standing in my garage during a hurricane, staring at my sabotaged generator and wondering how my life had gotten so complicated over something so simple. Now, the neighborhood was thriving, Patricia was gone, and justice had been served. The experience had taught me a lot about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation and evidence, and about how one person's actions could ripple through an entire community. It had been stressful and frustrating, but ultimately, it had led to positive change. My generator sat quietly on the side of my house, ready for the next emergency that hopefully would never come. But if it did, I was prepared, both with backup power and with the knowledge that I could handle whatever challenges came my way. The sun set over Meadowbrook Hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Kids played in the streets, neighbors waved from their porches, and the sound of laughter carried on the warm evening breeze. This was what a community was supposed to be. People living together, supporting each other, and maintaining reasonable standards without tyranny or fear. I went inside, poured myself a drink, and sat down to watch the news. There was nothing about HOA drama, no stories about generators or hurricanes. Just normal evening news, traffic reports, weather forecasts, and local interest stories. Normal. After everything that had happened, normal felt pretty good. The legal fees and repairs had cost me about $12,000 total, but the restitution from Patricia would eventually cover most of that. More importantly, I had my peace of mind back. I could come home from work without worrying about finding threatening letters in my mailbox or watching someone vandalize my property. Work at the research facility continued to be engaging. My focus had returned, and I was making progress on several long-term projects. My coworkers had followed the story in the news, and Janet had printed out one of the articles to hang in the break room as a joke. "Local hero defeats HOA villain," the headline read, though I had made her take it down after a week because it was embarrassing. As autumn progressed and the days grew shorter, I found myself reflecting on the whole experience with a clearer perspective. Patricia Whitmore had been a bully, plain and simple. She had used her position of minor authority to control and intimidate people, and she had escalated to criminal behavior when that control was challenged. But she was also a cautionary tale. Somewhere along the line, she had convinced herself that her behavior was justified, that she was protecting the community and maintaining standards. She had lost sight of what actually mattered: people living peacefully together, helping each other out, and making reasonable compromises for the common good. The HOA board's reforms reflected those values. The new bylaws were shorter, clearer, and focused on actual community needs rather than petty control. The approval processes were streamlined and reasonable. The enforcement mechanisms included multiple levels of review and appeal, preventing any single person from wielding unchecked authority. It was a model that other HOAs started copying. I received emails from people across the country asking about our reforms and how they could implement similar changes in their own communities. I shared everything freely, hoping that other neighborhoods could avoid the kind of situation we had gone through. In November, the Meadowbrook Hills HOA held its annual meeting. The attendance was the highest it had been in years, with over 100 homeowners showing up. Robert Chang presented a year in review that showed improved satisfaction scores, increased property values, and zero legal complaints against the board. "This has been a year of transformation," Robert said to the assembled crowd. "We faced a serious crisis, but we came together as a community and created something better. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, and I'm optimistic about our future." The room erupted in applause. Looking around, I saw happy faces, engaged neighbors, and a genuine sense of community pride. It was a far cry from the tense, fearful atmosphere that had existed under Patricia's leadership. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. It was still weird being treated like some kind of local hero, but I appreciated the sentiment. "You made it possible for the rest of us to speak up," Mrs. Henderson told me, squeezing my hand. "Thank you." As December arrived and the holiday season began in earnest, Meadowbrook Hills transformed into a festive wonderland. The new HOA board had organized a neighborhood decorating contest, but it was fun and voluntary, with no fines or penalties for people who didn't participate. The winners got a gift basket and bragging rights, nothing more. I put up some simple lights and a wreath, nothing fancy, but it felt good to participate without fear of some violation notice because my decorations didn't meet some arbitrary standard. On Christmas Eve, the neighborhood held a caroling event. About 40 people showed up, walking the streets together, singing and spreading cheer. We ended at the community center, where the HOA board had provided hot chocolate and cookies. Standing there, drinking cocoa and listening to kids laugh while parents chatted, I felt genuinely grateful. Not just for the immediate warmth and happiness, but for the journey that had brought us here. Patricia's actions had been terrible, but they had ultimately led to necessary change. The generator story, as it had become known, was now part of Meadowbrook Hills history. New residents heard about it, old residents told different versions, and it served as a reminder of why vigilance and community engagement mattered. As the new year approached, I made resolutions like everyone else. Exercise more, read more books, finish some home improvement projects. But the most important resolution was simply to stay engaged with my community. to attend HOA meetings to vote on issues, and to never take for granted the positive changes we had fought for. Patricia Whitmore had stolen my generator key, sabotaged my property, and tried to assert tyrannical control over the neighborhood. But in doing so, she had inadvertently created the conditions for real, lasting positive change. Justice had been served, the community had healed, and life had moved forward. On New Year's Eve, I stood on my porch watching fireworks light up the sky. My generator sat safely on the side of my house, properly secured and maintained. The neighborhood around me was peaceful and happy. And I was home, truly home, in a community that had learned valuable lessons about power, accountability, and the importance of standing up for what was right. The storm had passed. The power was on, and the future looked bright. Sometimes, the hardest challenges lead to the best outcomes. Patricia had panicked when the storm knocked out power for days, facing the consequences of her own destructive actions. Justice had prevailed, the community had transformed, and I had found my place in a neighborhood that finally lived up to its potential. Life went on, as it always does, but now it went on better.